Thank you all for participating. Let's get ready to start the show. So, how are we going to reach Latino voters and earn their vote? Notice I didn't say get them to vote, I said earn their vote because that's what we need to do. We need to earn their vote and we need to keep it by continuing to earn their vote. So, with that, let me introduce you to our next speaker. So, Mike Madrid is an American political consultant, one of the country's authoritative experts on Latino voters, and a co founder of the Lincoln Project. A senior advisor to both Democrats and Republicans, he is a partner in Grassroots Lab and a political consulting firm in California. He's the author of a new book called The Latino Century about how Latinos are influencing and changing democracy. And I have a copy of it right here. It's a really great book. And honestly, you can always tell if I like a book by how much like tabs. I have tabs and I have notes on stuff. So you can always tell when I like a book. That's usually how my husband picks his next book to read to see which one has the most tabs. So Latino Century, you all. It's out in the stores. Get it. Let's read it and let's figure out how we can earn the Latino vote. And along with that, I want to tell you all something else. I had to drive up from Austin to Blanco, Texas today. And when I did, I listened to Mike Madrid's podcast. It is called The Latino Vote. Welcome, Mike. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. What a kind introduction. And thanks for picking up the book. And hopefully we'll have some good questions on it tonight.
When I opened up chapter 16 in your book, it was about when you saw President Reagan using dehumanizing language that we are actually still hearing today. And it was about what he called immigrants. He said, immigrants are coming over the border. It's a sea of red. It's a red tie of communism. And I'm an 80s kid. You're an 80s kid. So that was like the buzz terms then. I mean, communism was this like bad thing. But today we hear terms such as convoys and drug dealers and chaos and rapists and invasions and criminals. So, what can we do as Democrats, especially in Texas, which is like the ground zero? I mean, I think Greg Abbott basically made the border issue an issue. He created this. He did. So what can we do to win the messaging war against Republicans when it comes to the border? What should we be doing differently here?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to answer it a few ways by saying, this issue is it's a real issue. Immigration and the immigration levels at which we're experiencing both through legal and illegal means is a real issue. The way that you handle it is something entirely different. And that's what Republicans have lost the capacity to do. One of the reasons why Texas went so decidedly Republican was because of George W. Bush, who was extraordinarily accommodating in the brand of conservatism that he was presenting to Latino voters. That was a campaign that I was a part of. I write it in the book. I'm very, very proud of what we did. There's a very welcoming sense of what his vision for America was, regardless of how you felt about his issues. That's changed considerably, decisively, 180 degrees different in the Republican Party, and I explain why. But let me also make this clear, too. Kamala Harris is right now running on a pretty conservative platform on border security. Right? The Democrats have essentially acknowledged through the House Border Security Conference, which is just newly established, that they're going to have to change direction on this issue. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a racist person. This is headed up by Ruben Gallego, Mr. Gonzalez, Anthony Gonzalez down in the Rio Grande Valley. It's headed up by Salud Carbajal, a good friend of mine in Santa Barbara, my dear friend Lou Correa, congressman from Orange County. Really good Democrats, really good meaning people who recognize that we can't just blame Trump, although he deserves a hell of a lot of blame. I burned down my career to make that case and fight the evil that he represents. But at the same time, that doesn't relinquish us from the responsibility of taking the reins here and doing exactly what Kamala Harris is leading us to do, which is to have a different vision of where the Democratic Party has been on this issue historically, get more legitimacy with the center, and most importantly with Latino voters. Here's the real fascinating point of the moment. Latino voters have decisively changed over the past 20, 30 years, and where they're going, where we are going as a community is going to be very different for the next 30 years. That's the whole thesis of the book. The idea that we can somehow ignore or not elevate pocketbook and economic issues to the detriment of immigration as an issue and expect that we're going to continue to win votes is not bearing out in reality. And when Joe Biden signed the executive action on asylum, 69% of Latinos supported him on that. That's compared to 70% of all Americans. So there's virtually no difference anymore on these issues. And Kamala Harris, to her great credit, recognized that, is leaning into that, is following the lead of a lot of Latino Democrats, and perhaps most importantly, is starting to consolidate Latino voters back from slipping away where they were and bringing them back into a more historical range. There's still a long way to go, by the way, but she's at least stopped the hemorrhaging and is bringing them back by centralizing this issue and leading and guiding the Democratic Party in a different, I would argue, much better direction, because Latinos are responding and they're coming back to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things in your book that that you said that we need to work on. One of them was to that would increase the Latino vote. One of them was to focus on voter registration, because we have not been registering voters at the rate that we were registering voters several years ago. So that rate dropped. So one of them was registering voters. Another one was how we frame the economic messaging in order to appeal to Latinos and their families, because when there's layoffs or there's jobs or there's something going on in the community and economically, it impacts them first. So can you go more in depth on a couple of these issues and tell us where the opportunities lie, especially in Texas?
Yeah, let me use the contrast of California, where I'm from, a state I love very, very dearly. But a big part of my work has been looking at California and Texas. On paper, both of these states look demographically pretty identical. There's basically the same percentage of Latinos, the same percentage of whites, same percentage of other minorities, but one is kind of this ruby red state, or becoming less so, more purple now, Texas, but for the past 25 years has been really the red standard. In California, of course, has been the blue standard. And it's becoming a little bit less blue now, too, largely because of the rise of Latino votes. The conventional wisdom back in the day was that Texas was going to turn blue because of the rise of the Latino vote, the Hispanic vote. People don't really say that as much anymore. But the reason why is the main difference between California and Texas, again, identical on paper, but why one is so red and one is so blue, has been because of white voters. In California, whites on the coast are very progressive. Inland whites are very conservative. In Texas, most whites have historically been pretty conservative, regardless of educational levels. That's changed as your urban centers, and that excellent presentation you provided earlier shows. They're becoming bluer in large part because of white, college-educated, high-tech workers that are bringing those values to Texas. And if Texas were just able to limit the growth of republicanism amongst Latinos on these blue-collar issues, you would probably already see Texas going blue, or at least be very, very close to that. So the challenge becomes, how do you fight that demographic wave? Because it's never been odd in Texas to have Texas Republican Latinos or Republican Hispanics. That's normal in Texas. In California, that just doesn't exist. It's beginning to now, but it never has historically. And one of the reasons is because a lot of the industries that Texas promotes are a blue-collar, non-college educated workforce. The energy patch, of course. You heard a lot about the rightward shift in the Rio Grande Valley and along the border communities where people work in law enforcement and border security issues, manufacturing, construction. 1 in 5 men work in the construction industry or related field. These are blue-collar workers, and Latinos are starting to take on the characteristics of the white blue-collar workforce as they generationally become more and more, quote unquote, typically American. That's how they identify themselves, more than a racial or ethnic identity voter. And this is happening at the time when the Democratic Party is consolidating its vote. The reason why Texas is becoming more bluer, more purple, is because more college-educated voters are moving into the state, and they're bringing those progressive values with them. That's what's happening. And so this divergence between college educated and non-college educated voters is why there's been a resistance for Texas fully flipping into a blue position. And the idea that Latinos would continue to be quote unquote a minority voter isn't bearing out the way that we thought maybe 20 years ago that would be the case. So until there is that national, and again, Texas is very open to a lot of these industries, and that's why you're seeing this blue collar workforce responding. California, you've seen the opposite happen, right? We are openly antagonistic to a lot of those from a policy perspective, those industries, and Latinos are now kind of pushing back and pushing away from the Democratic Party for that reason. So as the Democratic Party, the real challenge, as I argue in the book, is to whichever party becomes a multi-ethnic working class party will become the party of the next generation and the dominant party of the next generation. And right now, the Republicans have a really big problem with being multi-ethnic, with being multiracial. They just don't like it. The challenge for Democrats is they've got to have a working class agenda where working class voters feel more at home in the party. And that's the way housing is central to all of that. And I think it's a big part of where Texans have the biggest opportunity.
Those are some really great points. It definitely is giving me a lot to think of. So, what do you predict that the Kamala and Waltz ticket will do to the Latino vote?
Well, the good news is they've stopped this movement that's been moving away from them. And again, this has been happening for the better part of a decade. Most people just realized it in 2020. Hillary Clinton's numbers came down considerably from Barack Obama's in 2012. So as I try to point out, this has been happening for about 10 years now. Kamala Harris is still not doing as well as Biden did in 2020. There's still a ways to go. Trump does seem to have this weird ceiling at 35-37%. But I do believe that they've changed the trajectory and the messaging to be very, very well positioned to make incursions and start bringing that Trump level of support back down towards the high 20s, low 30s range, which is ideally where it should be for a Democrat to win nationally. So I think they've made the adjustments. They're doing the right thing. Time, I think, is advantaging her for the moment. But the challenge is they let this go a little bit too far. And you're actually seeing Republican defections from Trump, even in a state like Texas, starts to really make as much of a difference as the natural growth of Latino voters in helping Democrats make Texas more competitive.
Really great points. And I liked a lot of what you had to say. It was very, very good insight. So I know that, at Mothers, we have a team of moms in the RGV that are working very hard to get out the Latino vote in the RGV. So shout out to Fabiola, who's our leader there in the RGV. Thank you. And I'm sure that our team there is learning a lot from listening to you tonight. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Good luck. Your work is important.
Yeah, thanks so much.